Hello, my name is Freeman Michaels. I am running for Congress in California's 52nd District as an independent. I wanted to do this live stream because I've been a part of and witnessed a lot of Democratic clubs, and I don't mean the Democratic Party, I don't even mean politics in general, but just the concept of democracy in a club. And it doesn't seem to be working. Oh no. Sorry about that. It does not seem to be working. And what I mean by working is that the general will of the club, of the people in the club, isn't getting impacted. And that doesn't seem to be specific to any political party or an organization. It seems to be the way we are implementing democracy in a club. And the first thing, so I went to, it was the San Diego Community Review Board on Police Practices. And I had been to another group where a guy had told me about his experience in this community review board. And effectively what this is the community is trying to have direct communication with the police department such that they can get police violence under control. And we spent a good part of the meeting talking about some chokehold, carotid restraint. And what I found was interesting is because of the way democracy is implemented in these clubs, it's not like the will of the people gets reflected. It is what the leadership of the club or whoever is controlling the meeting, that person has a massive amount of influence. And if they aren't really interested in getting to the bottom of individual points, they just want to go through the club motions of letting people speak and stand and then vote, then the will of the people doesn't get reflected. So here was the main point of this meeting, and they had tons of items on the agenda, but the main point of the meeting was, at least the reasons why I was going, was the review of this chokehold policy and another policy. And some people said, on the people side, they said, well, we don't like this, we're having complaints, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, legit. I'm not really interested in the details yet. But they had complaints about some police tactics. Fine. The police response was that they've been using it for decades, and it was 50% effective, which sounds like a bad number, but then they also cite that the taser was 50% effective. And there was no deaths since 1992. And that response seems like it was legit. Okay, they've been using it forever. Why are we now having complaints about this? But at no point did the police department address why are these complaints coming in now? And the police department then said, you guys are going off anecdotal evidence. We should have data, and it would be interesting to go through the data and see what's valid and whatnot. I'm like, yeah. This shouldn't even be a vote thing. This should just be a rational logic and reason thing. And I apparently I spoke up out of turn in this meeting, but the guy said, we'll provide you this data. And then they kind of moved on. I'm like, yeah, can we get this data? And then they started being a little wishy-washy, like, well, we can't give you all the data. And it was kind of one of those things I was like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't really expect them to call them out. I thought they were offering an olive branch and saying, hey, let's look at the real data. Because if this chokehold is not going to harm someone, it's just going, it sounds awful, but it's just going to terrorize them as opposed to getting shot or tased, maybe that's a acceptable good step at this point. But we still don't, because of the way this meeting was run, and this is not specific to this club, it's all clubs, all Democratic clubs, it's the person in charge. If they aren't interested in getting to the bottom of all these ideas, the club can just move on because they got their meeting minutes. And as long as people are allowed to speak and they vote, that's all they have to do for the club. So the point of what I wanted to ask is, why is this thing even needed? But that doesn't get asked. And when you speak up in these clubs, they don't have to answer you. So they had a public turn to speak. So then that's when I got to speak. And I said, I'd love to see this raw data so that it doesn't have to be a decision based on anecdotal evidence and all this other stuff. They also cited that they're like, well, one of these incidents that you're complaining about wasn't even in San Diego City, it was in San Diego County. I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's not their jurisdiction. But then we find out that the city and the county are trained by the same groups and they use the same tactics. So it is a relevant story. And because the meeting it's not incentivized to solve problems. All it needs to do is have democracy to say, well, we had a Democratic club, and what can you say? The community showed up, they voted, but it didn't work. Okay, so that right there, the fact that you can't get responses is a problem. I had to file a piece of paper so that I can speak next week. It's just really bizarre. And so this guy, there was a guy he was the reason why I showed up here, because I heard his story before. He was supposed to be the black guy on the community review board so that people with darker skin than me can not live in fear of the police. And they've pulled a bunch of weird tactics. I don't know, they said he was out of line. I wasn't there. I don't know if it was true or not. He seems like a mellow guy. But they basically got him kicked off the board, but he's still on the board, but he can't vote, but he voted this time, but someone else. It was just like, at no point is anyone actually trying to solve the problem. It's like each person's just trying to do their job, do enough of their job. So the police department, in this case, is just saying, well, we've got these stats to show it's fine. Maybe the stats are real. Maybe they're a little bit massaged. I asked to the community side of the group about these stats, and they said, well, a lot of them are, I don't know what word they use. It's not classified, because I don't think you can classify things at the city level, but a lot of information wasn't provided for them. So that is now assuming that this government agency, our police department, doesn't have any corruption. And I don't know that that's a good assumption that we can make nowadays. And the problem all comes down to the fact that there is no deliberation in these clubs. If someone has a valid point, like, why do we even need to choke people? Or here's another step I would like to back it up even further. When human beings are on their knees or on the ground, why do police departments need to continue hitting them or beating them? At any point when a human being has surrendered to the enforcement arm of our government, the police department, I don't think the police department should continue hitting them. I don't think that's a lot to ask. But we could even bring up that topic and have the deliberation we needed. Oh, great. You guys can all watch the fireworks over the Midway now. That is the USS Midway. It's the aircraft carrier in the background. There's no way anyone's going to pay attention now. There's no way that... I can't even pay attention. But there's no way that someone can make a point and have it stick unless the person leading the meeting wants to make it stick. But even then, they're still limited by the group approved upon meeting minutes. So if they start varying off of these minutes, it's not gonna, then all of a sudden they're out of order. You have to remain order. It's almost like whoever created this system knew it wasn't going to work, but they sold it as, you're going to have the will of the people because you have democracy in this group. And in some sense, that's right. But if your goal is only to get more votes and not to solve the problem, your goal is to get what you want and go and rally other people to get what you want, rather than to seek what the other side is saying is wrong and find a solution. That is getting loud. And I've seen this, I first experienced, I've lived, admittedly, a sheltered life. I wrote software for 2 decades, most of it from my pajamas at home. And I didn't realize how bad and how poorly a process as decisions were made like this. And honest to God, my first experience was not too long ago when I went to a large San Diego Democratic Club meeting. and I think it was all of the San Diego Democratic clubs, and they were voting on some issue, and the issue was irrelevant, but it was somewhat controversial, and someone went up and made a really good point. At least I thought it was a really good point. And then someone else gave a standard talking point that, in my opinion, had some lies in it or some misleading or some stats that weren't really quite relevant. But that's what they wanted, and they only wanted to get more votes. So it becomes a matter of who's a better speaker and who's more believed and who's more known in that group, rather than the idea. The best idea wins. And this is how local clubs are run. This is how the city clubs are run. This is how Congress is run. This is how the DNC is run. And they sell it as democracy because it's going to reflect the will of the people. But it ends up not doing that because there's too much propensity for corruption at the head of whoever's leading the meeting. And there's no incentive to actually solve the problems. The incentive is to try and get your way. And I think we need to sit with this and understand that if this is the process by which we are going to make decisions, that we shouldn't be surprised when these decisions are awful. Now, let's look at Congress. It's the same concept where the Speaker of the House has too much control and someone can stand up and make all these great points. A few people have gone back and seen old Bernie Sanders videos where he's calling out the Fed, or Ron Paul and Rand Paul calling out the Fed, all sorts of things. And do they ever get responded to? No, but they should be. These are valid questions. Like, what if your biggest issue is that you don't trust an institution? And all they're going to say, well, don't impugn my integrity. Okay, my bad. Well, your integrity is impugned now, but can you answer the question? And they can't, and they don't have to. That's the problem with these clubs. You don't have to. You can hide behind all of this crap and never answer questions. You are never forced to deliberate. And then it becomes a matter of who can gain more votes, who's more popular, what's the societal mood, what's the emotion like. And it has nothing to do with the best process or the truth. My solution is not necessarily one that would apply to individual clubs, but more that we need to acknowledge this is how large-scale societal decisions are made. And I don't think that's healthy. I don't think it's terribly sustainable at this point. I saw a video of Nancy Pelosi getting asked a question about capitalism by some young student well-spoken. I was like, wow, good job, kid. You asked a good question. And she just had this weird, just almost like a seizure response. She's like, well, we're just capitalists. That's all there's to it. Aren't you leading here? Aren't we supposed to be listening to the people? What if the people don't think capitalism is working? What if people don't think Congress is working? Really think, what was the last time, this last year, you would think after 2016 election that this would be a good time for Congress to clean up their act. There was clearly enough stuff to do. But what did they do? Nothing. They didn't do anything on healthcare or nothing. And how can they be, let's just start from when I was born. How can they be in Congress for 40 years and not have all these plans ready to go? The Pentagon has plans. They have plans for everything, almost every different situation. But Congress and the Democrats don't have single payer ready to go. That's their holy grail. Or Medicare for all, the public option, or what I'm encouraging people to do. Why don't they want communities to become independent and self-sufficient? And you have to start, if you're not getting your needs met as a society, as a community, as I don't think we are, since our access to healthcare has been getting worse, and war seems to be inevitable and ongoing, I think it's time and it's fair to question any process that isn't working. And I've seen enough of the smaller democratic clubs, political or not, continually be able to avoid the needs of the members by hiding behind the rules of democracy, by hiding behind meeting minutes, by becoming inflexible, and just saying, well, these are the rules. And I've seen that same behavior play out in Congress. And with that, it is no surprise to me that FBI corruption couldn't be contained. The CIA is off doing who knows what. People didn't even know the Federal Reserve can print that money in the bailout, and they certainly couldn't do anything about it. No one in Congress spends any time talking to their community and actually volunteering their time trying to make it better, or communicating with them, or being straight that the government isn't going to solve any of these problems, or being straight that the government is this corrupt. I mean, think about how bad some meetings get when people just, they ramble on too long, or they change the subject, or it's so easy to get off topic, even when they want to solve the problem. Think about how bad things can get when you're in Congress and you have forces all over the world that want their needs met, not the needs of the people. And maybe their needs are met when Congress is ineffective and inefficient and can't deliberate and can't solve any problems. It sounds kind of familiar. And I think it's time for us to accept that's how things are run and that's how things are governed. And if we don't like what we have going on, and I don't think many people do, then maybe it's time to change, and maybe it's time to be okay with challenging previously established processes that we're not really supposed to question, like democracy. And I'm not at all advocating, I don't like top-down institutions for this very reason. Anytime there is a central point that gets to make a decision, and it's not distributed out to the people, then that central point becomes the focal point for greed. It's like if you are going to run for president, there's a lot of people have a vested interest in having your ear, and it takes a lot of effort to keep all those interests away from you. I don't think that's happened in my lifetime, at least. Anyway, that was my experience with Democratic clubs. I'm unfortunately not too impressed. Meetings take too long. They take too long, and they just get absolutely nothing done. And I think it's time for us to get something done. That's all I had for today. Thanks, everybody, and I will see you on the interwebs.